In episode 1, we took this 2003 Honda CR250R and started getting it torn down to the frame. We got all the plastics ripped off, got it all cleaned up, brought it inside the shop and started tearing into it. And as you guys remember, this thing was in rough shape. A lot of the nuts, bolts, and the axles just had an impossible time getting off. But eventually we got it all taken apart, got everything laid out on the mat, and this is where we left off. What's up guys, my name is Matt Berger and welcome back to part 2 of the CR250 build. So there's 3 main parts to a bike build. You've got number 1, which is buying the bike, taking apart the bike, doing the disassembly. You've got number 2, which is kind of the cleaning and preparation process of getting everything kind of ready to go. And then you have part 3, which is the assembly of the bike and kind of the completion and finishing steps. Part 1 and 3 are my favorite steps. Part 2, this cleaning and just preparing everything process is it's pretty time consuming. We're gonna have a bunch of different kind of clips throughout this video, but hopefully it keeps your guys' attention and kind of really shows you all the little stuff that you have to do when building these bikes. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into it. And this linkage is the first thing I want to address. If you guys remember, we had a horrible time just getting this stuff off the bike, so I was hoping that the bearings wouldn't give us as much of a problem. And since these things were just so old and rusty, they ended up just kind of like falling out of there. It wasn't that bad at all, so I was pretty happy with that. And then we took it over the 12-ton shop press, made quick work at those bearing races, used a blind bearing puller to pull it out of the linkage arm, and overall, this whole thing went pretty smooth, and I was pretty happy with it. And these parts are still looking pretty gnarly, so we brought them over to the parts washer, dropped them in there, and this is really the first step that I like to do on all the parts coming off the bike, is to get them in the parts washer to get the most of that grease and grime off of there before digging into them any further. This is a Harbor Freight 20-gallon parts washer that I got for like $100 a few years ago. I use a 50-50 blend of Simple Green HD and water. I've got it heated using a 5-gallon bucket heater, and I've got this cheap little magnetic light that I got off Amazon. This thing works great. So let's go ahead, get the rest of these parts, get them in here, and get to cleaning. While we continue cleaning that stuff up in the parts washer, this is a good time to look at all the parts since we have them disassembled and figure out what we need to repair or replace entirely. And a good example of that is this swing arm. Mechanically, this swing arm is perfectly fine, but cosmetically, this thing is destroyed and beyond repair and is just not going to work for this build. So I went over to eBay and actually found a 2008 CRF250R swing arm. These will mount right up to the CRs, and this thing was in awesome shape. Now, eBay is my favorite place for finding any used or replacement parts that you can't just buy new. It's also a great place to take photos and list your stuff that you're getting rid of or that you're replacing to recoup some of that money. For example, we were able to get $100 out of that old swing arm, and I was able to sell a bunch of other parts as well. These wheels are in rough shape, they are bent, they are cracked, the rear hub is wrong, so I was actually able to pick up a used OEM one on eBay that will work great, and these things are just going to need a complete overhaul, so I was able to get them completely torn apart and ready for the next stage of this build. Something that I've never done before that I've been seeing a lot of experienced bike builders do is actually remove these casting lines on all the aluminum pieces. So before we start, we got to hook ourselves up with some new Prime MX wheel pads. If you guys do not have these, you are missing out. So after way more hours than I initially thought this was going to take, I found out that this process was actually pretty time consuming and a little bit difficult. There's definitely a technique to this that I kind of had to learn as I went. I was using a whole bunch of different Dremel attachments, drill attachments, the Scotch-Brite wheels, the rough pad, the fine pad, just trying to figure out the best method to get the best finish. That way I could move forward with all my other parts. And eventually I kind of landed on a method that worked for me, which was to use the Dremel attachment to take off the majority of that casting line and then take it back over to the bench grinder to clean everything up and then finish it off by hand. Now overall I was pretty happy, but I definitely want to go back and clean and smooth everything up before the finished product. In doing all this, ended up removing a ton of aluminum material and sending that dust all over the shop and making a huge mess all over the tables, the floors, every surface. So this gave me an awesome opportunity to get everything pulled out, give the shop a good deep clean because it's been a while since I've done it. Let's talk about the vision and theme for this project. This is something that I always like to do on these builds. I think it's like one little extra step that kind of adds some inspiration and story behind a really awesome bike build. And what we're doing with this one is modeling off of Ricky Johnson's 1986 Honda CR250. The 80s Hondas are so iconic with their blue seats and their gold wheels, so easily recognizable. I mean, even the 2023 Honda CR450 has a 50th year anniversary edition, rocking those colors as well. Ricky Johnson was one of the most winningest riders back in the 80s, atop one of these Honda CR250s. He won like 7 AMA national championships, so to model this build and inspire it off of his bike, running the number 5, I think it's just gonna be awesome and kind of tie the whole story together. But this still is a 2003 bike, so it's not gonna be a replica. That's why I like to call it an inspired build, because this is still a modern bike. So what we're gonna be doing is actually modernizing it a little bit more. We're gonna be updating the plastics to the 2023 CR450 plastics using the TX race kit. This is by far my most in-depth project bike build that I've ever done. Definitely the most research, time, money, everything invested into this build, and I'm really excited for you guys to see it. And speaking of all the time and money into this, I had an original budget of $5,000. That is completely gone. I've gone well over that, and that has a lot to do with the depth of this project that I'm doing. I wanted to do it right, and as I got going, things just, one thing led to another. It kind of snowballed, and I not only want a bike that's gonna look really, really good, I want it to run and ride just as well. So we're doing a lot of work with the brakes, a lot of the control components. We're doing some motor work, making sure this thing is running in tip-top shape, because that's what we're gonna do. I'm not just building this bike to look at, I'm building it to ride, and we're gonna have some other faster guys ride it as well, and I'm excited for you guys to see that in the coming videos. This hammerhead case saver is actually pretty nice, and I'd like to reuse it, so I just got to clean up some of this stuff and then get rid of that fading red anodizing. And I like to do this using just easy off oven cleaner. I got this at Walmart. It's a pretty easy process that only takes about half an hour. You just spray the stuff on, wait 5 or 10 minutes in between coats. I usually do about 3 or 4 coats using a brush to just agitate the material, and then you're left with just a bare aluminum piece. I'm going to be replacing most of the hardware on this bike, but there are some bigger pieces that we are going to go ahead and get re-zinc plated, essentially making these bolts all look brand new. So we're going to go ahead and get them prepped over there on these Scotch-Brite wheels, get them thrown in the ultrasonic cleaner to get them really cleaned up and prepared before taking them to a local zinc plating company. Essentially, if you give them crap, you will just get back shiny crap. So this is what they looked like before, and here is what they look like now. Now on some of the bigger pieces like this rear axle, there was some pitting, not a whole lot we could do about that. I also went ahead and got some yellow zinc. I know Honda uses some yellow zinc in their OEM hardware, so I knew we wanted to do that. But yeah, all this stuff actually only cost me like $70 from my local place down the road who does some zinc plating. It's called Akron Plating Company if you guys are local to here. But yeah, it was pretty inexpensive. My first time doing zinc, and overall I'm just super satisfied how this stuff turned out. So these are all the parts we're going to go ahead and get powder coated on this build. The frame and subframe we're going to do red, the triple clamps, the hubs, a matte black in the rear shock spring, a candy or illusion blue. All this stuff is going to turn out awesome. Now usually I would powder coat at home for free with my friends, but we don't have an oven that's big enough to put this frame in, so I'm going to take it over to my powder coat guy that I've been using for years. He does an awesome job, and I'm just going to let him handle all of this stuff. There is still so much work to do with this bike, and we are far from being finished. The entry deadline is April 30th. That is coming up quick. That means a lot of awesome content on this build for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time in part 3 of the CR250 build.